Okay. I don't want to make it too long, so it reads like this. My family loves to cook. Well, I should say that Shelley loves to cook, and she gets the kids on the act whenever possible. I, on the other hand, don't care much for the kitchen apart from what ends up on the table. I don't like the shopping, the cleaning, or the conversation about how the cook found the perfect mushrooms or should have added a bit more basil to the sauce. I just like to eat. But I do have the occasional moment of team spirit. So a few weeks before Christmas 2001, I decided to do something nice for the foodies in my family. I've watched just enough Food Network to know how important it is to have really good, sharp knives, how important it is to have really good knives and keep them nice and sharp. The point was literally driven home for me when I cut my hand slicing into a tomato. Apparently, a sharp knife cuts evenly and cleanly, whereas dull knives slip around and jam into the knuckle of someone forced to make a dash. But anyway, I decided to take our big, dull, knuckle-stabbing chef's knife to the knife store and have it professionally sharpened for Shelley. So I decided to sneak the knife out of the house one day while Shelley was supposed to be at work. I was in the kitchen, coat on, knife in hand, looking for a bag to put it in, when Shelley came in. She'd come back home to get something. So quick-thinking guy that I am, I hid the knife in my coat pocket of my big winter coat. I made up some story about why I was leaving and I rushed out the door. I drove to the store where we bought the knife, and they told me that they didn't sharpen knives, and they sent me to the cutlery at the local mall. It was actually from the Galleria and then over to South Minneapolis. For those of you who don't see it. As I pulled into the mall parking lot, I got a call from my friend Tim in Kansas City. We've been trying to talk for weeks, so I put my earpiece in and took the call. By the time I had walked to the cutlery store, Tim and I were deep into conversation. I wandered over to the middle of the mall near the escalators to finish the call. I was in classic multitasking mode, talking on the phone, pacing a bit, thinking about the knife, watching the clock to make sure I got home before Shelley did. And before long, I pulled the knife out of my pocket and started absentmindedly running my thumb along the edge of the blade to see how dull it was. Well, after a few minutes, I noticed a security guard from the mall walking around and keeping his eye on me. At first, I didn't think much about it. I had other things going on, but after a while, I could feel the guy's eyes piercing the back of my head. So I said to Tim, "Hang on a second, I'm going to say something to the security guard who keeps looking at me." I turned around to find that the security guard had been replaced by a plainclothes police officer who had his gun drawn and pointed at my face.
Oh,
He shouted, "Drop the knife, get on the ground right now." He actually shouted, "Drop the knife and get on the ground." I got struck by the football. I wouldn't have a rock when the guy started. Yeah, I'm the both editor sucks. Whoa! He shouted, "Drop the knife, get on the ground right now." I was terrified. I really thought this guy was going to shoot me. He had a crazed-eyed look that I guess police get when they have to pull their guns in a mall to apprehend a long-haired, 6'6", knife-wielding assailant wearing a big hooded coat and talking to himself. I kept thinking, just do what he says and he won't shoot you. It seemed like mere seconds. 7 other officers showed up with their hands on their guns. I could hear Tim in my earpiece asking, "Dude, what's going on? Are you okay?" I wasn't about to say anything, so Tim started yelling, "I'm staying on the line. What's going on?" Should I call the police? I let go of the knife and I dropped to my knees. The officer kicked the knife away and shouted, "Lay in your stomach and put your hands behind your back." I did what he said. The officer then put his knees between my shoulder blades and cuffed me tightly and told me to roll on my back. I tried to do it, but it wasn't easy to roll over when you're in handcuffs and pressed against the glass partition by the escalator. So the officer yelled at me again and grabbed me by the hood and lifted my chest off the ground. As he pounded my face first back into the floor, I could hear Tim shouting, "Are you being mugged? What's happening?" The officer then yanked me in a sitting position. That's when he noticed the earpiece. He ripped it out of my ear and said, "What is this for?" "It's my cell phone," I said as calmly as I could. "Who are you talking to?" he demanded. "Tim in Kansas City." Then the questions really started. "What are you doing carrying a knife in the mall?" "Getting it sharpened at the cutlery store." "Can you prove that?" "Well, how can you prove something that you haven't done yet?" So I gave it my best shot. "Well, I was just at Williams-Sonoma store across the street and they told me to come here." Turning to another officer, my keeper said, "Can you call in and check on that?" Then he looked back at me with pure disdain in his eyes and said, did it ever dawn on you not to walk? Did it ever dawn on you not to bring an open knife into the mall 3 months after the terrorist attacks? Well, yeah, I guess not, but I wanted to be a surprise to my wife. And then she walked in the kitchen and, what do you do for a living? He said. Well, I'm a pastor. Seriously? Yeah. Oh boy. And after 10 minutes of questions and phone calls, the officer walked me into the cutlery store and said to the clerk, sharpen this guy's knife and give him a bag, would you? With that, he walked away. And the clerk said, yeah, we don't sharpen knives at the store. But here's a bag. Once I got back in my car, I was overwhelmed with emotion of it all. I was still incredibly scared and shaking, and I was embarrassed. I was mad at myself for being stupid, and at the officer for using what seemed to me to be excessive force. For the first time in my life, I felt like the police and I weren't on the same side. I'd always felt good about the police, even when I was arrested in 4th grade for shooting my fellow Village Terrace apartment resident, Storm Hulger, in the leg with my BB gun. I believed the police were there to serve and protect, but that afternoon, driving back to the mall, I felt like a criminal and a victim at the same time. I passed a squad car on the way and thought, screw you. When I got home, I told the story to my family, and they laughed like crazy. But I was getting madder by the minute. I realized that I'd been stupid, and that I'd been in the wrong. But the whole thing had just gotten out of control. I know the officer was doing his job, and I understand his motives a bit more when I learned from my friend Tony, that guy, who works as a police chaplain, that the officer was working in the mall as a part of a sting operation. Apparently, the restroom on the floor just below where I was standing was a meeting place for men to hook up and find sex partners online. The officer probably thought that I was there to hurt someone. Instead, I was just a dumb guy trying to finish a phone call and do something thoughtful for my wife. But when it comes to the legal system, there's only a right side and a wrong side, and nobody wants to be on the wrong side. Unfortunately, religious life isn't so different, particularly when it comes to thoughts of sin. For centuries, Christians have used the language of the legal system to define sin and its consequences. God is the judge, God's commandments to the law, and breaking the law brings on God's judgments in the form of death and damnation. There's a debt to be paid, so Jesus comes along and pays on our behalf. The blood atonement is a restitution for our crimes. For many Christians, this is more than just a metaphorical way of understanding sin. It's practically the synopsis of the gospel. And then I go on to explain that Jesus' way of explaining it is not that there's just a side of a law and you broke the law, but that we live as these people who are affected by sin, and God wants to bring that healing to us. And it's much more concerned not about judging us, but about bringing redemption and healing in our lives. So any kind of thought of God is about how we can be made whole. The book kind of goes on